Your son either confesses or he's out of this family, my dad said, after my parents pinned the missing $5,000 on my 14-year-old. Even though my brother's kids stole it and they knew. My son went pale. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at my brother and said, my son looked at me the way a child looks at the one person in the room they believe will save them. Not with words, not with crying, with eyes that said, they're lying and you know it, and please don't let them do this to me. He was 14. He was standing in a room full of adults who had already made up their minds, and the look on his face is the reason I said what I said to my brother. Not because I was angry, because my son trusted me to be the one adult in that room who chose the truth over the family's comfort. My name is James. My son Ethan is 14 years old. When he plays basketball, he gets B pluses. He still asks me to check under his bed sometimes, even though he would die before admitting that to his friends. He is not a thief. But on a Sunday night in November, he stood in his grandfather's living room while 4 adults decided he was one. And the system they used to convict him was the same system they used on me 30 years ago. Let me tell you about the first time I stood in that room. I was 11. It was a Saturday morning in September, the kind of morning where the air is just cool enough to make you want to be outside. My brother Scott had been throwing a baseball in the backyard with his friend Danny. Hard throws, the kind 11-year-old boys do when they're trying to impress each other. I was inside at the kitchen table reading a book about space. I remember the book because I remember everything about that morning. I heard the crash from the kitchen, glass and something heavy hitting concrete. I walked to the garage door and looked through. The garage window had a baseball-sized hole in the center. Cracks ran from the hole to every corner like a spider web. Glass on the floor. The ball was sitting in the middle of the shards, still spinning slightly. My father came downstairs. He was wearing the weekend polo he always wore on Saturdays. He looked at the window. He looked at the ball. He looked at the glass. Then he asked one question. Who did this? Scott was standing 3 feet from the broken glass. He had a glove on his hand. Danny was behind him, already moving toward the back gate with the body language of a kid who wanted no part of what was coming. When I was in the kitchen doorway, 10 feet away, holding a book about the solar system, my father looked at me. Not at Scott, not at the glove, not at Danny, at me, the kid with the book. I knew it, he said. I opened my mouth. I said, Dad, I was inside the whole time. Don't start. I was reading. I didn't even go outside today. I said, don't start. That was it. The investigation was over. 2 sentences from me. 2 shutdowns from him. My father didn't require evidence. He required a direction, and the direction was always me. The window cost $200. My allowance was docked for 3 months. 12 weeks of no money for a window. I was reading a book 10 feet away from when it broke. Scott never said a word. He stood there with the glove still on his hand, the ball 3 feet from his shoes, and watched our father take the cost out of my future. My mother was standing at the kitchen sink. She could see the backyard from the window above the sink. She saw who was throwing. She knew. She dried a plate. She put it in the cabinet. She let the sentence land. When I was 16, my father's car got scratched in the driveway, a long white mark down the passenger side. Scott had thrown a party while our parents were away for the weekend. I wasn't at the party because I was at my summer job. One of Scott's friends scratched the car with his bike handlebar on the way out. My father came home on Sunday night, saw the scratch, and looked at me. Not Scott. Me, because I had recently gotten my learner's permit. The permit was all the evidence he needed. How did you scratch the car? I didn't. You're the one with the permit. I was at work on Saturday. I can show you my time card. Just tell me what happened. He didn't want the truth. He wanted a direction. I paid for the repair with my summer job money, $340. I found out the real story 2 years later at a graduation party. Danny's sister walked up to me and said, you know Danny's the one who scratched your dad's car, right? He told everyone. She said it like it was old news, like everyone knew. Everyone except the kid who paid for it. I remember both of these not as bad days. I remember them as training. My family trained me to be the one who absorbs blame. My brother was trained to let me. And my parents were the coaches who ran the drills until the pattern was so smooth, it felt like gravity. You didn't even notice the direction anymore. It was just the way things fell. Now let me tell you about November. It was a regular Sunday, or it was supposed to be. My wife Laura and I drove to my parents' house with Ethan for what we thought was a normal dinner. Pot roast, football on the TV, the usual. We pulled into the driveway at 4:30. My brother's car was already there. That was the first thing I noticed. Scott usually shows up late. He lives 40 minutes away and treats arrival times like suggestions. But today his car was parked, engine cold, windows already fogged from sitting. He had been here for a while. Laura looked at me. Scott's here early. I noticed. That's weird. Yeah. Ethan was in the back seat with his headphones around his neck, looking at his phone. Normal 14-year-old on a normal Sunday. No idea what he was walking into. The second thing I noticed was the living room. We came through the front door and the furniture had been moved. The couch was pushed back against the wall. The armchairs were arranged in a semicircle facing one chair in the center of the room. Not a football-watching layout. Not a dinner party layout. A courtroom layout. Someone had moved the furniture before we got here. My chest tightened. I didn't know exactly what was happening yet, but my body knew. My body remembered this room. My body remembered standing in this exact space at 11 years old, being asked about a window I didn't break. The muscle memory of being accused started before my brain caught up. My father was standing by the window, not sitting, standing, arms crossed, reading glasses on top of his head. The posture of a man who had made a decision and was waiting for the last person to arrive so he could deliver it. I had seen this stance before. This was his verdict stance. His, I have something to say and you're going to listen stance. My mother was in the kitchen doorway, hands folded in front of her. She looked at Ethan when we walked in. Quick. Then she looked away. That look, the speed of it, the avoidance after it, that told me everything before a single word was spoken. Scott was seated on the couch with his wife Beth, settled, comfortable. The posture of people who had been here long enough to get past the small talk phase. Their son Kyle was at the far end of the couch with his phone. He looked up when Ethan walked in. Their eyes met for a second. Then Kyle looked back down at his screen. No surprise on Kyle's face. None. A 16-year-old in a room with rearranged furniture and tense adults, and he didn't look confused. He didn't look curious. He looked like someone who already knew what was about to happen, because he had been briefed. I'm sure of it now. Somebody told him what this meeting was about, and he sat on that couch and waited for my son to walk through the door. Laura squeezed my arm. She felt it too. The room was wrong. I put my hand on Ethan's shoulder. What's going on? My father didn't answer the question. He answered a different one, the one he had already decided. $5,000 is missing from my desk upstairs. It was in an envelope in the top drawer. Everyone in this family was in this house last Sunday. I want to know who took it. He said, who took it? But his eyes were on Ethan, not on the room, on my son. And the direction had already been chosen. I need to stop here and tell you about last Sunday, because the timeline is the part nobody in that room wanted to examine. 7 days earlier, the whole family had been at my parents' house for my mother's birthday. Casual, afternoon thing. The adults were downstairs. The kids were upstairs. Except they weren't both upstairs the whole time. Ethan was in the basement. He had brought his gaming laptop and was playing online with his friend Tyler. The game logs, which I checked later that night, show continuous activity from 2:45 p.m. to 4:10 p.m. He never left the basement. He never went upstairs. He never went near the office. The proof of his innocence was on a server the entire time. Nobody thought to look at it because nobody was interested in proving him innocent. Kyle went upstairs at 3:15 p.m. He told his mother he was going to use the bathroom. He came back downstairs at 3:37 p.m. 22 minutes for a bathroom trip that takes 3. The bathroom is at the end of the upstairs hallway. My father's office is 12 feet from the bathroom door. The desk is against the wall. The drawer is unlocked. It has been unlocked for 30 years because my father believes that a locked drawer in your own home is a sign of distrust. 22 minutes. And nobody asked about them. I know about the 22 minutes because I was in the garage fixing a shelf for my mother. I came inside for water at 3:20. I walked through the kitchen and I noticed the upstairs hallway light was on. I could see from the bottom of the stairs that the bathroom door was open. The bathroom was empty. The office door was closed. I didn't think about it at the time. Why would I? My nephew was upstairs using the bathroom. That's what he said. That's what everyone believed. 4 days after the birthday, Kyle posted new sneakers on his Snapchat. $280 shoes. He is 16 years old. He has no job. His allowance is $30 a week. Nobody in the family asked where the money came from. My brother saw the sneakers. He asked Kyle about them. Kyle said a friend gave them to him. My brother accepted the answer without a follow-up question, because following up would mean finding something he didn't want to find. Kyle also bought lunch for 2 friends at a restaurant near school. One of those friends told his mother. That mother mentioned it to my wife Laura at a school pickup. Laura told me. The chain of evidence was right there the entire time. Nobody in the family followed it because nobody in the family was looking in that direction. And then there's what my mother knew. She saw Kyle counting cash in the kitchen 2 days after the birthday. She asked him where he got it. He said, birthday money. His birthday is in April. This was November. She didn't ask again. She found a receipt in Kyle's jacket pocket while doing laundry. A restaurant receipt for $47, dated the Tuesday after the money went missing. She put it back in the pocket. She didn't mention it to anyone. The night before the living room meeting, she called me. Her voice was off, careful in a way that didn't match the words. She said, tomorrow your father wants to talk about the money situation. He'll just come by and we'll get it sorted out. She didn't warn me Ethan would be accused. She didn't say bring evidence or prepare yourself. She said sort it out, which meant the sorting had already been done. In my son's direction. Now back to the living room. My father looked at Ethan and said the sentence I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. Your son either confesses or he's out of this family. He said it like a verdict, not a question. The words came out smooth. Too smooth. The pauses were controlled. The speed was even. He had rehearsed this sentence. He had practiced it in his head, maybe out loud before we arrived. The delivery was too clean to be spontaneous. He pointed at the chair in the center of the room, the one someone had placed there before we got here. Sit down. Ethan looked at me. Yes, you don't have to sit, I said. My father's voice sharpened. This is my house. And that's my son. The room went tight. Scott shifted on the couch. Beth looked at the floor. My mother's hands unfolded and refolded. Kyle glanced up from his phone for half a second and then looked back down. Nobody challenged the ultimatum. Nobody said, wait, do we have proof? Nobody said, let's hear his side. The silence after my father's sentence was the second verdict. The room had already decided. My brother spoke next. He used his reasonable voice, the one I have been hearing since we were kids. The calm, measured tone of a man who has spent his entire life performing fairness, so he never has to practice it. Look, I'm not saying anyone is guilty. Let's just figure out what happened. Good, I said. And let's say you start with where everyone was between 3:15 and 3:37 last Sunday. That's oddly specific. It's the 22 minutes your son was upstairs. He was using the bathroom. For 22 minutes? He has stomach issues sometimes, you know that. I walked past the bathroom at 3:20. The door was open. The room was empty. Your son wasn't in there. The office door was closed. Scott's jaw tightened. His reasonable voice started to strain. What are you saying? I'm saying the bathroom was empty and the office was closed, and your son was somewhere between the two for 22 minutes. And nobody in this room has asked him about it. Because this isn't about Kyle. $5,000 is missing from a desk 12 feet from where your son was standing. It's about whoever was near that desk. Honey, and the only person near it was Kyle. My father cut in. That's enough. The money was in my drawer and I'm telling you what I believe happened. What you believe is in evidence, Dad. What I'm showing you is. Beth spoke for the first time. Maybe the money was just misplaced. Maybe nobody took it. The fog machine, the exit ramp, the soft, reasonable voice offering a version of events where everybody goes home and nobody has to look at the sneakers on her son's feet. It wasn't misplaced, Beth. It was in an envelope in a drawer. Envelopes don't misplace themselves. Someone opened that drawer and took it. The question is who was near the drawer? And the answer is your son. She looked at Scott. Scott looked at the floor. I looked at Ethan. He was pale. The color had left his face in sections, starting at the jaw and moving upward. He had looked at his grandfather first, then his uncle, then his grandmother. He was scanning the room for one face that might defend him, one adult who might say, "Hold on." He found none. Then he looked at me. Last, not first. He gave every other person in the room a chance to be the one who said, "Wait." None of them took it. And when he turned to me, his eyes said everything a 14-year-old can't put into words. His hands were shaking. He put them in his pockets to hide it. I saw it anyway. I stood in that living room and I was 11 years old again. Same room, same carpet, same windows, same father standing by the wall with his arms crossed, same brother sitting on the couch saying nothing useful, same mother in the doorway letting it happen. The only difference was the kid. 30 years ago it was me. Tonight it was my son. Same system, different target, and I decided in the 3 seconds between Ethan's look and my next breath that the system dies tonight. I looked at my brother, not my father, my brother, because my father is running a pattern he installed decades ago and may never see clearly. But my brother knows. He has always known. Your son was upstairs for 22 minutes. The bathroom is a 3-minute trip. The office is 12 feet from the bathroom door. He's wearing $280 sneakers he bought 4 days after the money disappeared. He has no job. He gets $30 a week, and you're sitting there letting a 14-year-old take the fall for it. I paused. Look at me and tell me you don't know. Scott's face went through 3 stages. First, the performance of confusion, the furrowed brow, the slight head shake. The "what are you talking about" face he has been using since we were kids. Second, the realization that the performance wasn't working, that the room wasn't buying it, that I had numbers and he had expressions. Third, something I had never seen on my brother's face before. The look of a man who has been standing behind a wall and just realized the wall is made of glass. He didn't answer. I turned to the room. I pulled out my phone. Ethan was in the basement playing an online game from 2:45 to 4:10. Here are the server logs. Continuous activity. He never disconnected. He never went upstairs. He never went near that office. I held the screen toward my father. He looked at it. He didn't take the phone. I swiped to the next screen. Kyle's Snapchat post, the sneakers. Date stamped. $280. This was posted 4 days after the money went missing. Kyle has no job and gets $30 a week. Who paid for these? The room was completely still. Then I looked at my mother. She was standing in the doorway with her hands clasped in front of her and her face arranged into the expression she uses when she wants to be invisible. The expression of a woman who is hoping nobody asks her anything. You saw Kyle counting cash in the kitchen. You asked him about it. He said birthday money in November. His birthday's in April, and you didn't ask again. Her face changed. You found a receipt in his jacket pocket, $47 at a restaurant, dated the Tuesday after the money disappeared, and you put it back in his pocket. You didn't mention it to anyone. She unclasped her hands. She clasped them again. You had the evidence in your hands, Mom. You had it in your actual hands. And you put it back in his pocket and let Dad drag my son into this room. My mother looked at the floor. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She just looked at the floor the way a person looks at the floor when the ground they built their defense on has been pulled out from under them. I turned back to my father. I sat in this exact room when I was 11. You blame me for the window Scott broke. I was in the kitchen reading a book. Scott was standing 3 feet from the glass with a glove on his hand. You looked at me and said, I knew it. I paid for that window with 3 months of allowance. My father's arms uncrossed, slowly. I sat here again at 16 when you blamed me for the scratch in your car. Scott's friend did it with a bike. I found out 2 years later. I paid $340 for a repair I had nothing to do with. The room was hearing this for the first time. Beth looked at Scott. Scott looked at his hands. I'm 38 years old, and I'm standing in the same room watching my son get accused by the same man, protected by the same silence, and convicted by the same system that decided I was guilty before it asked a single question. I let it sit. This family has one system. Blame the kid who won't fight back, and then call it justice. It worked on me for 30 years. It's not going to work on my son. My father's face did something I had never seen. The authority didn't collapse. It softened. Not into apology, into the confusion of a man whose verdict has just been overturned by evidence he should have found himself. He took his reading glasses off the top of his head and held them in both hands like he didn't know what to do with his fingers. Kyle shifted on the couch. He pulled his feet underneath him, not consciously, the way a person hides something they don't realize they're showing. The sneakers disappeared under the couch cushion. Scott stood up. Not to defend his son, not to apologize, to leave. He reached for his jacket and said, "We're not doing this." "Sit down," I said. "Your kid sat through this. So did mine. Now it's your turn." Scott looked at me. I looked back. He sat down. The room was cracked. Everyone could feel it. The structure my father had built for this evening, the chairs, the verdict, the ultimatum, all of it was still physically in place. But the authority behind it was gone. The prosecutor had become the defendant, and the evidence pointed where no one wanted it to point. And the 14-year-old standing near the door with his hands in his pockets was the only innocent person in a room full of adults who had failed him. I stood up. I put my hand on Ethan's shoulder. I said, "Get your jacket." He stood. His hands came out of his pockets. They had stopped shaking. We walked to the door. Nobody stopped us. Nobody said, "Wait." The room watched a father and his son leave and did nothing, the same way it did nothing when the boy was accused. At the door, my mother's voice came from behind me, small, cracking. "Please don't leave like this." I turned. "You had a receipt in your hand, Mom. You put it back in his pocket. You chose. Now I'm choosing." I walked out. The door closed behind us. In the car, Ethan was quiet for 3 blocks. Then he stared out the passenger window at houses passing in the dark. I drove and I waited because I knew the question was coming, and I wanted him to find it in his own time. "Dad, did they really know?" I gripped the steering wheel. "Yeah, buddy, they knew." He was quiet for another block. "Then why did they pick me?" I drove 1 more block before I could answer. "Because they've always picked us, and tonight was the last time." He nodded. He didn't cry. He didn't ask anything else. He just nodded the way a kid nods when something clicks into place that he didn't want to understand, but now does. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. The fallout was fast. Kyle confessed to his mother that night, not out of guilt, out of panic. Nor he saw the game logs and the Snapchat screenshot on my phone and realized the lie had about 12 hours left in it. He told Beth he took the money from the drawer while everyone was downstairs. He spent some of it on sneakers and lunches and a gaming console he hid at a friend's house. He had $3,200 left in a shoebox in his closet. Beth called Scott. Scott called my father. My father demanded repayment. And here is the part that will stay with me longer than the living room. The part that proves the system better than anything I said that night. Scott wrote a check for $5,000. He brought it to my parents' house the next morning. He slid it across the kitchen table. My father picked it up and put it in the same drawer the money came from. That was it. No family meeting, no assembled room, no semicircle of chairs. When no accusation delivered like a verdict, no ultimatum, no confess or you're out of this family. The kid who actually stole the money got a quiet conversation in a kitchen and a check from his father covering the damage. My son, the kid who didn't steal anything, got a trial. Kyle got a check. Ethan got a chair in the center of a room. That is the system. That has always been the system. One set of rules for Scott's kid, another set for mine. And the difference between those 2 sets is the entire story of my family in 1 sentence. My brother texted me a week later, "Can we talk about this?" I responded, "Talk to your son. He's the one who stole it. I'm the one who proved it. You're the one who watched." He didn't text again. My father called 3 days after the living room. His voice was different, smaller. The authority that had defined every conversation I'd ever had with this man was gone. I may have jumped to conclusions. "You didn't jump to conclusions, Dad. You landed on the same one you've been landing on for 30 years. The window, the car, the money. Every time, same direction. The only thing that changed this time is someone finally pushed back. He was quiet. You told a 14-year-old boy to confess or lose his family, a boy who was in a basement playing a video game while your other grandson was upstairs with his hand in your desk drawer. You didn't ask Ethan where he was. You didn't check the timeline. You assembled a room and pointed at the easier kid. That's not a conclusion, Dad. That's a habit. I want to make this right. You can't make it right. You can make it different going forward. But my son is going to remember that living room for the rest of his life. I remember the window. I remember the car. Ethan is going to remember the chair. He didn't say anything else. I hung up. Weeks later, he showed up at my door. December. Cold. He stood on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders lower than I had ever seen them. The man who stood by the window with his arms crossed and delivered a verdict looked like a different person on my porch in the winter air. I want to talk to my grandson. He doesn't want to talk to you. James, you told a 14-year-old to confess to something he didn't do or lose his family. You said those words to a child in a room full of adults who knew better and said nothing. You arranged the furniture, Dad. You moved the chairs, you set up the courtroom, and you put my son in the center of it without a single piece of evidence. I made a mistake. You made the same mistake 3 times across 30 years. That's not a mistake. That's a policy. And my son doesn't owe you a conversation just because you finally noticed the policy was wrong. He stood on the porch for a long time. The cold air moved between us. Then he turned and walked to his car, slower than I'd ever seen him walk. I closed the door. Not hard, just closed. Thanksgiving came. We didn't go. The morning of, I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. My mother. I looked at the screen for 3 rings before I picked up. The table feels empty, James. It felt empty when my son was standing in the middle of your living room being called a thief. Much you just didn't notice because the person standing there was mine and not Scott's. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear my father in the background. The TV, a football pregame, the sounds of a normal Thanksgiving morning in a house where nothing was normal anymore. We're having Thanksgiving at home this year, just the 3 of us. James, this is not how a family handles things. This is exactly how a family handles things when the other option is sitting at a table with people who framed a 14-year-old and wrote a check to cover it. You had a receipt in your pocket, Mom. You found it in his jacket and you put it back. You chose the easier kid to blame because the harder kid to blame had a father who would have made a scene. Well, I made the scene, and I'd make it again. Your father wants to talk. I don't have anything to say to him that I haven't already said, and neither does Ethan. I hung up. Laura was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had heard the whole thing. You okay? Yeah. You're not okay. No, but I will be. She walked over and put her arms around me, and we stood there in the kitchen for a minute. Then Ethan came downstairs in sweatpants and a basketball jersey and said, "Are we making the potatoes yet?" We set the table for 3. Paper napkins, no china, no centerpiece, no arranged seating. Ethan made the mashed potatoes. He added too much butter and not enough salt, and they came out thick enough to hold a spoon upright. We ate them anyway, every bite, The room was small and warm, and nobody accused anyone of anything, and the food wasn't perfect, and it was the best Thanksgiving we'd ever had. Ethan was quiet for weeks after the living room. Not angry, not withdrawn, processing. His grades didn't change. His behavior didn't shift. He still played basketball after school. He still did his homework at the kitchen table. He still asked me to check under his bed, even though he pretended he didn't. But he stopped asking to go to Grandpa's house. He didn't make an announcement about it. He didn't say, "I'm never going back there." He just stopped asking. The question that used to come every other Sunday, "Are we going to Grandpa's this weekend?" disappeared from his vocabulary. The absence of that question was louder than any argument. One evening, about 3 weeks after the living room, he walked into the kitchen while I was making pasta. He stood in the doorway for a moment. I could tell he had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. "Dad?" "Yeah. If you hadn't been there that night, I would have confessed." I set down the wooden spoon. I turned around. "Not because I did it," he said. because I thought that was the only way they'd let me stay. Grandpa said, confess or you're out. And I thought, if I just say I did it, maybe they'll stop looking at me like that. Maybe they'll let me come back to Sunday dinner. Maybe it'll go back to normal. My hands started shaking. I set them flat on the counter so he wouldn't see. Ethan, listen to me. You don't ever have to confess to something you didn't do. Not for them, not for anyone. Not to keep a seat at a table that wasn't being honest with you. I know. Son, I know that now. But that night, standing in that room with Grandpa looking at me and Uncle Scott not saying anything, and Grandma just standing there, I almost did it. I almost said I took it, just to make it stop. But you didn't. Because you were there. You were the only person in that room who looked at me like I was telling the truth. And that's the only reason I didn't say it. He took an apple from the counter. He went to his room. I stood in the kitchen with my hands flat on the granite and my eyes closed for a long time. A 14-year-old was willing to plead guilty to something he didn't do, to keep his place in a family that had already decided he didn't deserve one. That is what my father's system produces. Not justice, compliance, not truth, surrender. A machine that makes innocent people confess just to stay in the room. I broke the machine, and I would break it again every day for the rest of my life. Months later, Ethan was working on a school essay about trust. He came into the kitchen with his laptop and set it on the counter. Can you read the opening line? I looked at the screen. It said, trust is when someone believes you before they have proof. My dad is the only person I know who does that. I read it twice. I didn't say anything for a minute because I didn't trust my voice. Then I handed the laptop back and said, that's a good opening line. He nodded and went back to his room to keep writing. The essay got a B+. The opening line stayed in my head for the rest of my life. A year later, Ethan made the varsity basketball team. He came home with the jersey in his backpack and held it up in the kitchen with a grin that made him look 10 years old and 20 years old at the same time. We celebrated with pizza, and Laura took photos, and the evening was loud and easy, and ours. That night, Ethan showed me his phone, a text from his grandfather. 2 words, proud of you. I looked at it. I looked at him. What do you want to do with that? Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. His thumb hovered over the message. He read it again. Then he put the phone face down on the kitchen table and said, nothing. I nodded. He grabbed his basketball and walked to the driveway to shoot free throws before dark. I could hear the ball hitting the pavement through the kitchen window. Steady, even. The sound of a kid who had moved past something that most people carry for decades. The phone stayed face down on the table. The screen went dark. 2 words sitting in a quiet kitchen from a man who had his chance to say them in person, in a living room, on a Sunday night to a 14-year-old who needed to hear them more than he needed to hear anything in his life. He chose confess instead. The ball kept bouncing outside, steady, even, getting nothing but net. Thanks for staying until the end. If this one hits something, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.